This is a lot of lead up, but it is going somewhere, I promise. Welcome once again to the Think Like the Test podcast. I am Ben Caldwell. With me again is Carrie Wida.
Hi, everyone.
And Carrie, what are your desert island books? If you were to get stranded on a desert island and you were to be out there for who knows how long, but you somehow were able to choose in advance the books that you were going to take with you while you waited to be rescued, what are 3 books that you would want to have with you in the absence of anything else?
Any books? My number one first would be House of Leaves by Mark Danielewski, because I think that to read it appropriately would take a very long time. I've never gotten through Infinite Jest, so let's throw that in there. And
Okay.
oh no, you know what? I'd go with Great Expectations again. I feel like that's a very, very I have only recently realized like how incredibly dense that is. And I don't think I appreciated it the first time around. So let's throw that in there. What
Solid
about
choices.
you? Yeah,
Oh,
you had some lead up for this. So
this is not about me. The idea here is minimalism, right? If you had to get by on as little as possible, what would you get by with? And so like Desert Island Books is a great way of thinking about that. I think about that sometimes just in relation to what's here in my office. Like what's the minimum I could have and still work effectively? And then even for home life, like how much home does one need? Angela and I talk about this sometimes. Before our second daughter was born, we had bought a house, but we weren't able to move into the house. So we had to bounce around for a little bit. And it was a great lesson in minimalism. Like, what do we actually need to get by and be happy as a family? And thankfully, it wasn't very much.
That's great.
Now,
I'm so curious to see how this ties into test prep.
Right? So the National Clinical Mental Health Counselor exam changed formats in November of 2022. And the new format, I actually like a lot. I think it addresses some of the criticisms of clinical exams in mental health care. So instead of being like a sentence or a paragraph long vignette that you're supposed to address in the absence of any other context, there are long case descriptions, and each one applies to 9 to 15 questions that actually walk you through the stages of treatment. They talk about sort of initial work with this client, then middle stage work, and then late stage work. And so you can follow the client's progress over time and address their needs at different stages. You have a lot more information, a lot more context that you can work from. And I like that a lot. At the same time, it is a lot to read. It's a lot to take in. And I was looking at the sample vignette and questions that NBCC puts out, and they give this long vignette and then a bunch of questions about it, and did some admittedly rough math about, okay, if this is what the whole test looks like, how fast do you have to read just to get through the test? And if you're just reading the test, like forget about thinking about questions, forget about processing and determining right answers, that kind of thing. If you are just reading the test cover to cover, if this one sample vignette is representative of the test as a whole, then you need to read at more than 100 words a minute to get through. And that's not a super fast reading speed. Like most adults can read 200 or so words a minute. That comes down a little bit the more sophisticated or technical the material gets. But that reading speed in and of itself, that's achievable. The question then becomes, do you have enough time for the other thinking through and determining the right answer? Because we don't want these tests to be just tests of reading speed or tests of comprehension speed. On some level, they are. I mean, people run out of time when they're taking clinical exams. And that suggests some potential problem in not necessarily the format of the exam, but maybe the time limits. Because what we're assessing for, if it's your knowledge of how to practice within the field, well, that's not really time dependent. Most of the clinical decisions that we make, we don't need to make in like a minute's time. We can consult, look at resources, that kind of thing. This is a lot of lead up, but it is going somewhere, I promise. There were a couple of questions in that NBCC material for the NCMHCE that I noticed you don't actually need the vignette at all to answer. And so I'm going to give you a couple of those and see if you can answer them without any information about the client, because I bet you can.
Oh my gosh, interesting. Okay.
Here's the first one. There is a detailed 1,000-word vignette that we are skipping over entirely that walks through the intake process with this client. Here's the question. During the intake, how would you establish a therapeutic relationship with this client? A, challenge her irrational thoughts about her self-evaluations. B, advise her about how to manage painful experiences. C, summarize her emotional struggles and desire for change. Or D, explore areas in which she could improve interpersonal relationships.
C, summarize her emotional struggles and desire for change.
No? Amazing. How did you do that?
Okay, good. I did doubt myself for a second there, but well, I mean, there's obviously challenging irrational thoughts is you have to have already established a therapeutic relationship to do that. Advise her about how to manage painful experiences. I mean, again, you have to already have established a therapeutic relationship before you're going to get there. And explore areas in which she could improve interpersonal relationships. Sure, but I feel like that's part of the early phases of treatment, but that's not establishing the therapeutic relationship. Summarizing her emotional struggles and desire for change demonstrates like a reflective accuracy and makes the client feel heard, or gives the client an option to tell you that you're wrong, which strengthens the therapeutic relationship.
Absolutely. Spot on. Didn't even take you very long. Because absent any other information in the vignette, you answered the question at hand. Like, which one of these has to do with establishing a therapeutic relationship? There is nothing unique about that process to this client. You don't need to know this client at all. And I've got some questions in my California MFT clinical exam prep stuff where people will read the rationales, and the rationale says you actually could ignore the case vignette here entirely and just focus on the question. And very rarely, I've gotten a couple of questions from people saying, well, wait a minute, aren't the questions on the real test, aren't they going to fundamentally depend on the uniqueness of the vignette? And the answer to that is no. You're going to get some questions that you could answer entirely correctly, regardless of what is in the specific vignette. So, Carrie, for you, same vignette that we're still not going to share with you. Okay. What long-term goal would guide treatment of the client's presenting problem? A, spend 1 hour each day focusing on what is going right in life. B, return to premarital levels or better for self-confidence and autonomy. C, decrease negative thoughts and feelings by half in 6 weeks. D, get out of bed before 8 a.m. each morning.
This is hilarious. It's B, return to premarital levels or better for self-confidence and autonomy, because each of the other ones are short to like mid-term kind of goals. The first one is spend an hour each day focusing on what is going right in life, and that's pretty immediate. C is decrease negative thoughts and feelings by half in 6 weeks. Again, that is not a long-term goal. And then D is get out of bed before 8 a.m. each morning. Again, you could start working on that tomorrow morning. So the only one that's a long-term goal is B, return to premarital levels or better for self-confidence and autonomy.
I often ask you about your confidence in a particular answer. So for this one, on a scale of 10 to 10, how confident are you?
Yep, a solid 10, maybe 11.
Of course. You could just ask yourself, which of these is a long-term goal? And you can ignore the entirety of the case vignette and just answer the question at hand, and you're there.
Wow.
And that vignette is paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs. Now, listen, there are some questions in this sample vignette that NBCC puts out. There are some questions related to that vignette where you need to know the information in the vignette. I'm not advocating that anybody just skip the case vignettes on their exam. You need to read them through. But you will find questions where to answer correctly does not, in fact, rely on anything that is unique to that vignette or to that client. It's just a matter of knowing the order of treatment or knowing what is a long-term goal, knowing the difference between a goal and an intervention, like those kinds of things. Sometimes that's all you need to get the question right. And people will tie themselves up in knots going back to the case vignette and thinking, wait a minute, this question's trying to trick me. Nope. Some of them are just easy.
I can totally see how that would happen. I mean, I am sure I would fall into that, because if I was faced with that question after reading paragraphs upon paragraphs of a vignette, this would be the situation in which I would think, no, Carrie, you're jumping to conclusions. That's the obvious answer. They're trying to trick you into picking that one. But without all of the extraneous information, I can just focus on long-term goal. Pretty obvious. That's fascinating.
Yeah. Well done. 2 for 2. And on a counselor test. You're not even a counselor.
Now I could be.
Now you could be. If you also want to be a counselor despite not being one, wait a minute, that's a terrible introduction. If you are pursuing licensure in the mental health field,
please pay us a visit at highpass.com. That's highpass.com.
We've got more of this great strategy guidance in addition to a ton of information that will help you to better understand the key material for the test itself. On behalf of Carrie Weeda, once again, I am Ben Caldwell. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you soon.